Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. What if Naruto was the son of the Greek gods? Part -4. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this and comment for next part. And now let's start the fanfic. Hera then looked at Kushina with envy on her face and gave a small smile for a second to her but replaced it with an emotionless mask just as quick. Kushina smiled back at the Queen of Heaven but sighed in thinking about how she missed her son and real husband and his wife. From her dimension. Enough, thundered Zeus, getting annoyed. All of you will go to your rooms and get some sleep for tomorrow, hotly said Zeus. The occupants looked outside and that the moon was slowly making its way up the starry night. They guessed it as about 10 p.m. and Annabeth with her mother thought, if we go to sleep only we can get up earlier to read more. Apollo and Hermes escort all of them to their rooms, demanded Zeus. "O course father," laughed Apollo and Hermes. Kushina went over to Hades to speak with him. "Hello," smiled Kushina with love in her eyes. Hades smiled back and thinking, I guess this is not so bad after all. Hades finally questioned, "What can I help you?" Kushina smiled and asked, "No, but I just wanted to say have a good night's sleep." With that she kissed him and walked away. Hades looked shocked and moved his hand where she kissed him, then gave a small smile to her retreating form. Persephone looked emotionless but vowed to have some words with her dear husband and lord. Olympus was truly a sight to see at night because the gold and silver glowed in the dim lights that reflected off the moon and stars. The torches glowed in the night like small fireflies glowing in the darkness of the night. The demigods were amazed at the sight to behold and gave small smiles to each other. Besides Thales and Kushina, who frowned and looked down, feeling out of place with the other demigods. But they made their way to their rooms in silence. The rooms were designed to be like their parents' domain and color scheme. The only one freaking out was poor Kushina. The room was all pink and too girly, it could possibly be considered a Barbie's dream house. One of the worst parts of the room that it was filled with pictures of lovey-dovey stuff. Like rainbows, people holding hands, and a few hearts in some of them. But moving on, the worst part was that the place had the smell of all the perfumes in the world, which was killing her nose. She looked at the room for a second, blinked once, twice, and one more time before she fell on her knees and screamed out, "My eyes, it burns." The other demigods could hear Kushina's terrified screams and winced and hoped to the gods that their room was not like Kushina's. While Zoe and Phoebe went into their mistress' guest room. Inside, the room was filled with bow and arrows with an archery field. The bedroom was filled with scenery of a forest at night and you could see all the forgotten constellations from long ago. The room had 2 silver beds with silky sheets filled with moons and stars. You could smell a little of the forest in the room. All in all, the 2 hunters were at peace and happy to be in here but missed their sisters deeply. Talia and Thales went to Zeus' room because Talia could speak to her different dimension self about everything in her world. Like if she had a brother named Jason or if Zoe died. Once the door was opened, it freaked Talia out. The room floor was a glass floor so you could see all the way down to the ground. Talia looked over at Thales but found no fear and wondered, how could she not be afraid of this? Thales properly knew what Talia was thinking about, so she said, "Naruto, help me." Talia just nodded her head fearful and climbed into one of the ground-level beds decorated with thunderstorms and lightning. Thales just looked at Talia and shook her head, questioned, and thought to herself, is how afraid I was with heights before Naruto helped me. Thales focused her powers and flew up onto a floating bed, then closed her eyes, excited for the next day to come. She gave a small smile, hoping to see Naruto soon. Both were listening to Green Day until sleep consumed both of them. Annabeth went into her mother's guest room and her eyes widened, then smiled broadly. The reason is that the room was filled with books and more books. The cases of books were next to a computer properly with the internet if she know anything about her mother. She sighed and read a couple of books that interested her until she fell asleep with a book about architecture in her grasp. Percy, on the other hand, loved his room because it was exactly like the cabin in Montauk. where his mother and father met and where I shared some of my summers with my mom. Some of the beds had pictures of sea life and a trident on it. The fountain, however, was the best part because it reminded him of Poseidon's cabin. The bed was comfy and it felt like you were on the seabed because there was coral on the walls. With the roof had a special glass that was made only on Olympus that could let you view anything going on in the seas. But the best part is that it had blue chocolate chip cookies just like my mom's. With of course blue milk. Then he dreamily sighed, then said, "I'm in heaven right now." Then around after he was finished with his midnight snack he fell asleep with a smile on his face. Nico just grinned from ear to ear because his room looked badass. The room had Greek fire that illuminating the dark room. Nico put his picture of his sister Hazel and another picture of Bianca D'Angelo on the headboard of one of the beds. The beds had black silk filled with skulls and jewels. While some of the walls had murals of the underworld like Hades, Palace one side, and on the other side was an image of the Isle of the Blessed. It looked awesome in his option and decided to go to sleep and dream of a reality of both of his sisters being alive. Morning came and when the gods and goddesses came into the throne room they were shocked. The reason was that Kushina was soundly sleeping on one of the couches in the throne room. She looked perfect with her fiery red hair catching the sunlight coming through. She also had a soft comforting smile that would make her mother happy. While her mother tried to not to squeal on how cute Kushina looked right now. Hermes, Ares, along with Apollo especially were drooling and their eyes looked love-struck. The gods along with the goddesses, expect Artemis and Persephone, discussed on what to do with her. Finally it was decided that Hades wake her. Hades sighed but went over to her and shook her awake. Kushina ed and whimpered, 5 more minutes. Hades groaned but shook her awake again. Kushina suddenly punched him in the face with chakra enhanced that made him fly back hitting a wall, while leaving an imprint of Hades on the wall of Olympus throne room. He looked at his brothers sporting a megawatt smile on Zeus while Poseidon had a goofy smile. Hades had a bloody nose and Demeter and his brothers vowed to remember this for at least a century. Just then Artemis along with her hunters and Persephone came into the throne room looking questionable at Hades. Apollo shouted out, "Little sis." Hades tried to wake her up but Kushina punched him in the face. Artemis looked at Kushina with approval in her silver eyes and nodded to her with a smile on her face. She agreed again that she would make an excellent hunter. The gods looked pitiful at Hades while the goddesses looked pleased. Kushina looked half asleep and yawned, then she fell back to sleep. Aphrodite looked at Kushina with confusion because she was wondering why her daughter was sleeping here of all places. Finally Kushina woke up when the demigods came into the throne room. Kushina smiled cheerful, happy as can be, while the gods looked at her with a little bit of fear. "Now let's start read again," excitedly shouted Annabeth. "Okay, but who is going to be reading?" questioned Zeus. "I will," stated Kushina. Chapter 5 That Bull is on Steroids. "That's a funny title," commented Apollo, and Hermes agreed with his half-brother wholeheartedly. The demigods just shook their heads at the two immature gods' antics. The group tore through the night along dark country roads. "That is some serious driving," joked Apollo. Artemis rolled her eyes and muttered, "Idiot." Apollo smiled and said, "Ah, I love you to little sis." Artemis glared at her twin and snarled out, "Apollo, how many times do we have to discuss this? I was born first, isn't that right, girls?" Zoe and Phoebe nodded their heads agreeing with their mistress. Wind slammed against the Camaro. Rain lashed the windshield. "Dad isn't a happy camper today," snickered Hermes. Zeus glared at his son, disrespect to him, king of the gods, and slammed his precious master bolt on the throne room floor. The world down below experienced a huge thunderstorm that covered the entire sky with lightning flashing through the entire sky. While all this happened, the other gods and goddesses laughed at Zeus. The demigods on the other hand thought how temperamental Zeus was. The boys honestly didn't know how Percy's mom could see anything, but she kept her foot on the gas. "Well, that is my type of driving," smiled Ares, ready for a fight to start soon. Oh no you don't, in that car is my grandson and I will have to make a interesting love life like no other, snarled Aphrodite. Ares gulped and slumped in his seat with a pout on his face. The other gods and demigods alike laughed at the war god's expense. Naruto looked at Grover oddly, and when the lightning flashed, he saw those goat legs. He sighed, already knowing what he was, and knew that Grover was on their side, hopefully. No, he is with the monsters trying to kill you right now, joked Annabeth. I knew it, he trying to overthrow us and he kills everything he touches just like my daughter, scowled Zeus. Everyone just sighed and shook their heads sadly because you can't argue with Zeus. For one, he is so stubborn that a brick wall would seethe with jealousy. So, you and my mom know each other? Nope, he does not, said the gods and goddesses, with the demigods shaking their heads agreeing with their parents. Percy asked, not able to stay silent. Grover's eyes flitted to the rearview mirror. Always keep a watchful eye on your surroundings, said Athena. Annabeth nodded her head while the other demigods just rolled their eyes in good nature. Though there were no cars behind them. Not exactly, he said. I mean, we've never met in person. But she knew I was watching you. Starker, sang Apollo and Hermes. While the demigods just laughed at the two gods. Watching me, Starker, said Apollo while Artemis was getting irritated quickly. Keeping tabs on you. Making sure you were okay. Again Starker, smiled Apollo and Hermes. Will you shut up for once, scowled Artemis, and glaring at her twin and half-brother Hermes. The two hunters just nodded in agreement to what their mistress said. But I wasn't faking being your friend, he added hastily. I am your friend. What are you, exactly? Percy asked. A bad fighter, hissed out Ares. That doesn't matter, said Percy and the other demigods. Sure it does, laughed Ares. The gods looked at the war god in question. Ares just rolled his eyes and explained that he wouldn't want a pansy as a friend. The females in the room glared at the war god in fury, especially Aphrodite. That doesn't matter right now. It doesn't matter. From the waist down, my best friend is a donkey. Goat seaweed brain, teased Annabeth. Grover let out a sharp, throaty, blah ha ha. Naruto could tell that Grover a bit ticked, but he gaffed. That was really funny to him. Run for your lives, screamed Percy and Nico. Goat. Grover cried. What? Once getting himself under control, Naruto helped the poor guy out. So thoughtful, gushed Aphrodite. Percy. He is a satyr, a being that is half human and half goat. Are you sure he is not my child? Questioned Athena. Nope, Naruto is mine and not yours, exclaimed Kushina. Annabeth whispered to Percy and said, I guess you have competition now, seaweed brain. Percy blushed but remained silent, just smiled at Annabeth, making her blush cherry red. Athena looked shocked at how Kushina disrespected her and was about to say something but shook her head. Her focus went to her daughter and found her blushing at the sea spawns as she glared daggers at him. Percy felt unfriendly aura coming from Annabeth's mom, Athena, and saw her glaring at him. So the natural thing to do was pale and find a place to hide, because the third worst person to piss off is your girlfriend's parents. But the second worst is your mother, because you should never piss off your mom. But the worst and most terrifying is your girlfriend, because she could grab your balls and threaten to remove them. Huh. But, you would mean Mr. Brunner's myths. They're not myths, child, said Hestia while smiled warmly at everyone. The gods, goddesses, and demigods just smiled back, thinking how good she makes everyone feels. You paid attention to that? Naruto smirked. Let's throw a party. I like this kid more and more, said Apollo while high-fived Hermes, who agreed with him. Percy just glared at him. Okay. Anyway, with the way Grover reacted, I am assuming that other satyr would trample you for that donkey remark. You got it, smiled Thalls. I thought it didn't matter. Percy shot back while Grover bleated again. Obviously it does. Naruto replied with a smirk. Wait, so all that Mr. Brunner taught us was actually preparing us for this stuff? No, it was going to prepare you for your trip to Candy Land, Pedro, said Dionysus. Pretty much. Grover said. Great. Naruto replied sarcastically. Just what we need. Freaky monsters coming after us. You got that right, muttered the demigods. While the gods and goddesses bowed their heads and looked sorry for making their children having a similar fate. Not only that, but those three old ladies were the fates and not myths, and neither was Mrs. Dodds. Grover told them. So you admit there was a Mrs. Dodds? Percy exclaimed. Really, seaweed brain, laughed out Annabeth. Talia just shook her head while Nico smirked at Percy's discomfort. Thal's just looked like she has seen this every day. While Kushina just looked at Hades lovingly but smiled at the demigods in the room. Of course. Okay, so what was the point of hiding the fact that she was real? Naruto asked. The mist, dear child, smiled Hestia. The other gods and goddesses along with the demigods nodded their heads. The less you knew, the fewer monsters you'd attract, Grover said, like that should be perfectly obvious. It is so obvious, joked Hermes. We put mist over the humans' eyes. We hoped you'd think the kindly one was a hallucination. But it was no good. You both started to realize who you are. Percy is going to be confused, said all the demigods. Percy blushed, then gave a smile and laughing a little bit. The gods and goddesses just shook their heads fondly but remained silent. Who I? Wait a minute, what do you mean? Percy asked. See, replied Annabeth. No one doubted you, wise girl, smiled Percy. Annabeth blushed and Athena just glared at the sea spawn with annoyance. Aphrodite squealed silently, surprising most of the gods and goddesses along with the demigods. Yeah, you lost me as well. Naruto deadpanned. No, Naruto, don't be like Perse, wailed Nico. Nico, kelp head is not that bad, whispered Talia. I know, but don't tell him that, Nico whispered back. Artemis was glaring at the son of Hades in suspension for talking to her hunter. While Zoe and Phoebe glared at Nico because he was talking to one of their future sisters. While Kushina smiled, then giggled at Nico, thinking how he will react to his sister discovery. D'Angelo, never compare Naruto to Percy, threatened, joked Thals. Why yes madam, shakily said Nico, not knowing if she was serious or not. Thals smiled and looked at Talia, who grinned at her then raised her thumb up. The weird bellowing noise rose up again somewhere behind us, closer than before. It's gaining on you, run for your lives, shrieked Apollo. Shut up, brother, snapped Artemis. Apollo grinned and said, ah, come on sis, lighten up. I will lighten up when you don't flirt with my hunters, snarled Artemis. Apollo stayed silent because he didn't want to experience his twin sister's wraith again or ever. Whatever was chasing us was still on our trail. Of course it is, said Thals. The gods and goddesses just grinned at the daughter of Zeus. Talia just grinned and thinking how awesome she was. Percy, his mom said, there's too much to explain and not enough time. We have to get you two to safety. That is no fun, whined Ares. He got splashed with a gallon of Arctic cold water by Poseidon. Seaweed, will you stop that? Screamed Ares. Ares, what have I told you about calling me that? Threatened Poseidon. Ares gulped and said, to never call you that again. Yes, and the consequences, smirked Poseidon. To wear a pink I love my little pony's shirt, gulped a pale war god. Yes, grinned Poseidon. Enough with this nonsense, boomed Zeus. Hera glared at her husband and smiled at Kushina to continue before more fighting broke out. Kushina just smiled and continued. Safety from what? You mean by whom? Stated Athena and Annabeth. The other immortals and demigods in the room just rolled their eyes but smiled fondly at them. Before Poseidon interrupted by saying, always have to be technical, owl head. Of course, kelp for brains, smiled Athena. Percy whispered to Annabeth saying, is this how we act too? Annabeth looked unsure but looked at the others in the room, whom nodded their heads. Who's after us? I wonder who Perse pissed off this time, questioned Nico. Talia looked at the gods and goddesses, who had a look of confusion. She said, well, kelp head here has a way of pissing off anything that has a big ego. The gods and goddesses nodded their heads and went back to paying attention to the book. Kushina grinned but started again. Percy asked while Naruto raised an eyebrow. Oh, nobody much. Well, that's good, said Annabeth. Ah, Annabeth worried about kelp head over here, commented Talia. Well, yes, shuddered Annabeth. Aphrodite squealed, thinking how cute their love lives will be. Grover said, obviously still miffed about the donkey comment. Just the Lord of the Dead and a few of his bloodthirstiest minions. So no one, smirked Zeus and Poseidon. I hate you, glared Hades. The rest of the people in the throne room laughed or giggled. While Nico tried to hide the fact he was laughing at him because he didn't want to get grounded. Grover. Sorry, Mrs. Jackson. Could you drive faster, please? Yeah, because that is my son in the car, said Poseidon and Hades. Grover replied. What? You mean Hades? Naruto replied, and the ground shook a bit and Grover nodded, a little panicked. I am not that bad, am I? Questioned Hades. The demigods with the gods and goddesses looked anywhere but the Lord of the Dead. They were also feeling somewhat guilty because Hades is always the first one to get blamed. While the boys were trying to wrap their heads around all this madness, Percy's mom made a hard left. I like her driving, laughed Ares. Everyone just tried to ignore the war god's comment. They swerved onto a narrower road, racing past darkened farmhouses and wooded hills. Zeus thought about his daughter's tree prison, then sighed. And, pick your own strawberries signs on white picket fences. Where are we going? Percy asked. You are going to be running for your lives, said Apollo. Ares grinned and shouted, action! Finally, this book was getting a little boring. Aphrodite glared at Ares but said sweetly, oh, you think love is boring, do you? Ares, being the dumbier gods on Olympus, said without thinking things through, well, yeah. Aphrodite huffed and thought, maybe I should break up with him. Ares, shut up or I will kick your ass, smiled Kushina. Oh, you think a child of Aphrodite could possibly beat me? Questioned Ares. This one can, Kushina reported back. Then prove it, sneered Ares. Fine, I will, snarled Kushina. Enough of this, later you can fight, but now we read, commanded Zeus. The room quieted down and Zeus nodded his head, then boomed, Kushina, please continue. Kushina nodded her head but glared at the war god and continued. The summer camp one told you about. His mother's voice was tight, she was trying for Percy's sake not to be scared. The place your father wanted to send you. The place you didn't want me to go. Letting go of your child is the hardest thing in the world to do, Hestia smiled sadly. Hera and the others in the room nodded her head slowly. Please, dear, his mother begged. This is hard enough. Try to understand. You're in danger. When is he not? Said the demigods in the room. Because some old ladies cut yarn. Those weren't just any old ladies, seaweed brain, yelled Annabeth. I know that now, wise girl, frowned Percy. Annabeth sighed and said, I know, seaweed brain. Are you about done? Hestia smiled warmly. They nodded and listened to the book again. Percy asked and Naruto sighed. Man, if you paid attention in class, why that is bad. Naruto said, when they cut the yarn, that means someone is going to die. Sadly, that is true, said Athena. The gods looked down, thinking about some of their children having similar fates. Exactly. Grover said, the fact they appeared in front of you too, they only do that when you're about to, when someone's about to die. Whoa, you said, you. Percy freaked. Great seaweed brain, you can be observant for once, joked Annabeth. But I don't want to because I have you, smirked Percy. Annabeth blushed and looked away while Aphrodite squealed so loudly that her squeals broke glass. After everyone recovered from the horrifying torture that was Aphrodite screaming about love, Zeus demanded everyone to be silent and to continue the book. Kushina readily agreed so she didn't have to listen to her mother's scream again. No, I didn't. I said, someone. Grover replied. No, goat boy, you said you first and then someone after, said Talia. Still not very helpful. Naruto said. It is, but you don't know it yet, Naruto, smiled Kushina. Yeah, you meant me. Percy said. Not true, because kelp head here is standing here, smiled Talia. Annabeth whispered to Percy, I am glad it was not you. Percy smiled and said, Me too, wise girl, and put his hand her shoulders reassuringly. I meant you. Like, someone. Not you. You. God. I hope it is not me or you. Naruto replied. Me too, and a couple of other girls as well, winced Thals and Kushina. Boys. Percy's mom said. She pulled the wheel hard to the right, and they got a glimpse of a figure she'd swerved to avoid, a dark fluttering shape now lost behind us in the storm. Don't let your guard down anywhere, sweetie, said Kushina. Ares looked lustfully at her because she was the perfect woman for him. She was beautiful and was dangerous, a great combination. Aphrodite looked at the war god with a scowl on her ever-changing face. The hell was that? Naruto freaked. Naruto Uzumaki, watch your language, said Hera. Demeter looked disappointed at the book and said, you need to eat more cereal, young demigod, unlike my perfect core. Persephone blushed and stuttered out, please read, Kushina. Kushina nodded her head and started once more. We're almost there, Mrs. Jackson said, ignoring Naruto's question. Another mile. Please. 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 Poseidon started to saying, please, please, please. While the other gods and goddesses just sighed and smiled fondly at their brother or uncle. They didn't know what there was, but it had to be safe from whatever the hell was chasing them. Yeah, Camp Half-Blood, smiled the demigods, even Kushina, because Naruto tells her about camp when he is in the underworld with his family. It is not Mrs. Dodd's, that is for sure. Whatever it is, it's bigger and stronger than last time. It is the Minotaur, I believe, said Athena. Why is that, sis? Questioned Apollo. Well, the title said the bull on steroids, so it has to be a bull, finished Athena. Apollo had a blank look on his face and said, we will see if you are right by reading these books. Athena huffed at her half-brother's antics while Apollo grinned. The other gods and goddesses just shook their heads at their family interactions with one another. Before questioning silently, are we really this bad? The immortals looked at the demigods and saw them nodding their heads, so the gods quickly looked away before their focus was back onto the book. This is reminding me of the wave mission, only we are fleeing for our lives. Oh no, my poor baby, cried Kushina. The gods thought it must be Kushina's time of the month and left it at that. While Hera smiled fondly at Kushina and thought, she is a good mother, before glaring at her Zeus. While Naruto was thinking that, Percy was thinking about the blades Mr. Brunner had thrown to them. Of course, blame the centaur, laughed Nico and Talia. Percy blushed, then glared at his annoying cousins with a small smile on his face. Annabeth laughed at Percy's face because it was so cute, she thought anyways. Thals and Kushina smiled but remained silent, watching in amusement just like all the people in the throne room. Before he could ask Grover about that, the hair rose on the back of my neck. There was a blinding flash, a jaw-rattling boom, and the car exploded. It was an odd feeling being blown up. Good job, Perce, said Nico. Will you shut up, D'Angelo, shouted out Percy. Like you were, weightless, crushed, burned, and being hosed down all at the same time. Ah, good memories, whispered Nico. What do you mean death breathe? Questioned Talia. Well, wait and see, airhead, smirked Nico. Talia glared at him, then crossed her arms and huffed. Percy pried his forehand off the driver's seat in front him as his mom called out to him. I am fine, he said. No, you're not, said the Nico and Talia. Percy had a mocked hurt expression on his face and said, oh, how you wound me, dear cousins. That is our job, kelp head, aqua dude, laughed Talia and Nico. He heard Naruto mutter out a super, as they noticed the car was still intact because it was in a ditch. Looks like some of the crashes Ares gets daily or sometimes even hourly, laughed Hephaestus. All the gods and goddesses laughed except Ares, even all the demigods smirked or had amusement in their eyes. They sighed in relief that they were not dead, not yet anyway. Sweetie, don't talk like that because I want you to live a long and healthy life, smiled Kushina. Hera smiled at the red-haired mother, and her respect for her went up a few notches because she was so dedicated to being a good mother. The gods nodded their heads while the goddesses had watery eyes except for Artemis. but she did have a smile on her face and she wished that she got Kushina as a hunter. While Naruto was trying to regain his bearings, Percy noticed that Grover looked unconscious. Grover. Stupid satyr letting my daughter die, thundered Zeus. Now husband the satyr did his best, said Hera, her voice filled with hatred when she said husband. Zeus looked at Hera with a bit of fear and guilt on his face but became silent. The throne room was left with an awkward tension in the room. Food, he groaned. Same old Grover, laughed all the demigods in the room. Naruto's sweat dropped at that. Yeah, he was going to be fine. How true, sighed Thal's WTIH, a smile on his face. Percy, his mother said, we have to. Her voice faltered, because when the lightning flashed, they saw a huge figure through the mud-splashed window. Oh goody, some action, hopeful someone will die, smiled Ares. Kushina dropped the book and disappeared for a moment but reappeared in the behind Ares. The gods and goddesses along with the demigods in the room were shocked at how fast Kushina was. Then she punched Ares so hard that he fell off his throne and landed on the floor and made a shockwave along with a crater. Ares fell unconscious, by the way he is still in his goatee size. Meanwhile Kushina picked him up and snarled out, don't you ever say that again or suffer my wrath. The goddesses were cheering in their heads that Kushina finally knocked down Ares off his high horse. While the gods were afraid of Kushina because of her monstrous strength. Hello, Naruto said surprised. Son, don't get its attention, whimpered Kushina with tears running down her face because she felt so powerless to help her baby boy. The gods and goddesses looked sympathetic because they felt the same way every time their children has to battle for their lives. Hestia and Hera smiled and thinking that their family is coming closer and closer together. Boys, Percy's mother said, deadly serious. Get out of the car. She knows what the monster is. I'm impressed that kelp head over here got her to fall in love with him, stated Athena. Poseidon glared at her but then sighed and went back to daydreaming of his time with Sally. She tried, the driver said, but all the mud was blocking their way out. Passengers sighed. Ah, the Jackson luck, smiled Annabeth. Percy smiled and thought that Annabeth looked so beautiful when she smiled. He then paled and silently said, no bad thoughts, this is your best friend you are talking about. Get out now and run to the big tree. Well, how does a big tree help you fight monsters? Questioned Apollo. Artemis sighed and scowled. It is properly the camp boundary. But if it is the camp boundaries then Sally can't come, frantically said Poseidon. The sea god looked close to passing out due to much drama. While Ares just grinned and waited for the show to begin with a bag of popcorn in his hands. She yelled, pointing to a large tree in the distance as they got out. She knows, sadly answered Athena. The goddesses had tears in their eyes thinking if this is it for Sally. What? Percy replied, confused until the lightning flashed and a large pine tree in the distance appeared and that thing was huge. My daughter, smiled Zeus. Talia glared at Percy and shouted out, are you calling me Fat Jackson? No, exclaimed Percy with a blush on his face. Talia, Thals, Kushina, and the other demigods laughed at Percy's predicament. That's the property line. Knew it, excitedly said Apollo, and Artemis just shook her head then sighed. His mom said, get over that hill and you'll see a big farmhouse down in the valley. Run and don't look back. Yell for help. Don't stop until you reach the door. She is sacrificing herself for her son for more time getting away, cried Hestia. Percy looked down then sadly thought about that fateful day going over and over again in his mind. Annabeth just put her hand next to his and squeezed it. Percy looked up and smiled at her and sighed, letting the memory fade into the back of his brain. Mom, you're coming too. She can't, young one, sadly smiled Hestia. Her face was pale, her eyes as sad as when she looked at the ocean. Ah, she still has feeling for Poseidon, squealed Aphrodite. Poseidon blushed and wished that Sally was his second wife like Kushina was to Hades but sighed. No, Percy shouted. You are coming with us. Help me carry Grover. Percy, you are loyal, maybe too loyal, muttered Athena. Hestia just smiled at Percy and waved for Kushina to begin reading again. Food. Grover Ed, a little louder. Shut up, you stupid satyr, bellowed out Zeus. Naruto growled and yelled above the rain. Give him to me. We will get there faster that way. Oh, my grandson is so selfless and cute, screeched out Aphrodite. The gods and goddesses along with the demigods recoiled from the sudden glass-breaking force. Percy nodded and gave Grover to Naruto and turned back to Mom to see the creature coming towards them. The gods and goddesses became more interested in the center of the throne room's floor. An image started to appear just like an iris message. It showed a crashed 98 Camaro and 4 people in a heavy storm. 3 out of the 4 people in the image were teenagers. One was Percy with his sea green eyes and airbrushed black hair. The other person the gods knew was Grover. Grover was unconscious and groaning out for food. The next person was a young woman who had brown hair carrying a purse. The last person the gods looked at was a blonde-haired with blue-eyed teenager. The boy had an excellent build with 6 whiskers on his face. All in all, Aphrodite looked pleased with her favorite grandson's physical body. It was huge. That and it seemed that it had fur on it. The figure was cloaked in shadows that it was impossible to see except 2 horns that came up from its hairy head. But you could see the ring on its nostrils and had a lot of muscles. Athena gasped and knew what the monster was now. Naruto turned to look at it and yelled, "Holy cow. You mean bull," said Thals, the other demigods, and Percy. "There is nothing holy about that creature and it is not a cow." "You got that right," shouted out Poseidon. "Unlike my cows," grinned Apollo. The others in the throne room just sighed and waved the sun god off. Mrs. Jackson was able to shout out. "You got that right," muttered Percy. Naruto looked at her with a deadpanned expression that said, "Duh." And looked at it again and he saw horns jutting out its head. "Yeah, not a cow but a bull. Wait, what is the monster chasing after them?" questioned Apollo. Artemis sighed and then said, "You idiot, it is the Minotaur." "Minotaur?" panicked Poseidon. "Yes," grumbled Zeus. "Read Kushina so we can find out what happens to Percy and your son." Kushina quickly nodded her head and quickly read the next line. "Still it was not good. At least he knows," muttered and sighed Aphrodite. Kushina smiled at her mother and memories came to her when Naruto was first born. How happy she and Hades had been. Hades, Persephone, Aphrodite, Nyx, Hera, and herself are and always will be proud of him. "He doesn't want us," Mrs. Jackson called out. "He just wants you too. Besides, I can't cross the property line." "She's a good mother," smiled Hera. "More than you will ever be," whispered Hephaestus. Luckily for him, Hera didn't hear him. But Percy and Naruto started to say, "We don't have time. Go, please." "Sally, why do you have to be so selfless?" groaned Poseidon. "That is a trait Sally passed on to Perse, seaweed brain, kelp head here," said Nico Annabeth to Leah. This just made Percy mad and he went over to his mother and helped out all the way. "Ah, he is so kind," squealed Aphrodite. Her squeal made the occupants over their ears and less threatened of being deaf. "We're going together. Come on, Mom. He is stubborn, the boy gets it from his father," laughed Zeus and Hades. Poseidon just glared at his brothers but silently cursed his stubbornness. Naruto just smirked at Percy's stubbornness, just like him in some aspects. "I told you. Stubborn," sang Annabeth and Thals. "Mom, I am not leaving you. Come on." "Ah, he's so loyal," said Aphrodite. "Maybe too loyal," muttered Athena. They got a portion of the way but the monster was gaining on them and quick. "Run for your lives, it's a bull," screamed Apollo and Hermes. Artemis just got up from her throne and threw a shoe at them. But after the shoe had no effect, then she resorted to arrows. Naruto looked at it again and his eyes widened. "Holy crap, that thing looks like it is on steroids." "Oh, I see, the title of the chapter is Bull on Steroids," exclaimed Apollo. Artemis just put her hands on her face and whispered, "He must have been adopted because there is no way we are twins." "Hey little sis," said Apollo. Artemis reared her head and shouted, "I am not your little sister, I helped birth you. Well, you are still my younger sis, and I feel a limerick coming along, smiled Apollo. Zoe whimpered out, Lord Apollo, thou ask of thee not to, but was all she got across before Apollo started singing a limerick for Artemis. There once was a goddess from Sparta, who hated a man's piñata. While her eyes were stone cold, she had a dress of gold. Dancing with cow in Sparta. Tried to do a limerick but failed at it. Oh, I have a poem coming too, little sis, in your honor, grinned Apollo. Artemis shook her head begging for Apollo to stop, but he didn't listen. But luckily Zoe shouted to Apollo, the ask not to begin. That got Apollo's attention and looked at Artemis' face, which was bright red. He grinned that his plan to embarrass his little sis worked. After that limerick, Artemis' face was red and she wanted to find a hole and hide for a couple days. The gods and goddesses laughed at Artemis' poor blushing face. Artemis blushed increased. Zoe and Phoebe looked concerned with their mistress. Which Artemis waved them off and assured them she was okay. Then she said, Kushina, please read, or I may do something to my idiot of a brother. Artemis glared at Apollo but was ruined by her blushing face. Kushina began. He said, commenting on all the bulging and rippling muscles on that thing. Percy blinked owlishly, recognizing this creature from Mr. Brunner's class. That a first kelp head, teased Talia. Percy just huffed but smiled at her. That's Pasiphae's son, his mother said. I wish I'd known how badly they want to kill you. A lot more wants to kill him now, said Annabeth. Poseidon turned into a puddle of water and the gods along with the goddesses looked amused at Poseidon's transformation. But ease them in. Don't say his name, she warned. Names have power. Smart, remarked Athena and Annabeth. Annabeth blushed while her mother smiled at her in return. Terrific. This really is like the Wave mission. Naruto replied, getting odd looks as they ran. The same confused looks was plastered on all the gods and goddesses' faces with all the demigods besides Kushina and Thals. I'll tell ya later, Naruto replied as they ran. He too knew what this creature was and growled. It was a big brute called the Minotaur. Well, that is different, said Hermes. The gods and goddesses just nodded their heads in agreement. It might strong, but it was dumb if the books were right. Yup, pretty dumb, laughed Thals. Its senses are poor except for smelling, said Annabeth and Annabeth. The only thing that it could rely on was its sense of smell out in this weather, and it was only a matter of time before it found them. Don't jinx it, whispered Kushina and the others in the room besides Ares because he wanted action. As if on cue, the bull man bellowed in rage. Temper, temper, warned Apollo with humor in his voice. He picked up Gabe's Camaro by the torn roof, the chassis creaking and groaning. He raised the car over his head and threw it down the road. He has anger issues, isn't that right, little sis? Smirked Apollo. Artemis glared at her twin but sighed and thought he will never learn. But coldly began, Apollo, don't call me little sis. The other gods and goddesses just sighed and watched in amusement at the interaction of the twin archer. It slammed into the wet asphalt and skidded in a shower of sparks for about half a mile before coming to a stop. The gas tank exploded. Ah, so pretty, and there is action finally, sighed Ares. Aphrodite threw a shoe at him and screamed, Shut up, Ares, you are not going to endanger my perfect grandson. Oops, Percy said. Yeah, so much for not a scratch. The throne room was filled with laughter. Naruto laughed a little freaked out. That thing has Granny Tsunade's strength. No, Tsunade has a bit more strength than the Minotaur, sweetie, said Kushina. The other just have Kushina a look of surprise and are you kidding me stare. The males in the room just recoiled at the thought of a female having more powerful than a Minotaur and wondered if she leveled anything when it was her time of the month again. While the females just smiled and Artemis wanted to meet her. Boy, Percy's mom said. When he sees us, he'll charge. Wait until the last second, then jump out of the way, directly sideways. Wow, Uncle P, you know how to choose them, said Hermes and Apollo. Poseidon just blushed and waved his hand to Kushina to begin reading again. He can't change directions very well once he's charging. Do you understand, hopeful? Said everyone in the throne room. Oh, that is useful. Naruto said. How do you know all this? She studied unlike a certain someone, said Athena and Annabeth. Athena looked at Poseidon knowingly and Annabeth looked at Percy jokingly. Percy asked, I've been worried about an attack for a long time. I should have expected this. I was selfish, keeping you near me. But a mother's saddest thing to do is letting their children go, crooked out Hera and Hestia. While the other goddesses and Kushina nodded their heads in agreement because they know from experience. Mrs. Jackson said sadly, what's done is done. Besides, you're a mom, it is natural. Kushina and Hera smiled at the young blonde in the iris message. Hera thought, he might be different than any other demigod. Kushina looked at Naruto with tears in her eyes and smiled thinking how grown up he sounded. Naruto replied while Percy nodded to that statement. But, there was another bellow of rage, and the bull man started tromping uphill. Oh, I love this action, howled Ares. Everyone in the throne room looked at the war god in disgust but said nothing. Great. Naruto panicked. The bull man on steroids had smelled them and was charging in fast. Apollo and Hermes laughed at the nickname for the Minotaur. Everyone else was smirking or smiling because they thought it was funny. To Naruto, everything was happening in slow motion. He readied himself for what he had to do. Those are good instances, remarked the gods and goddesses. The demigods just nodded their heads wishing that they had instances like Naruto. Zoe and Phoebe frowned but couldn't deny that for a boy he was good. Zoe scowled and didn't see Kushina or Thal's smirking face wondering how Zoe will react to her dating him. More importantly Artemis' reaction I guess we will have to protect him against an enraged moon goddess. Gathering some chakra to his legs and tightening his hold on Goat Boy, he patiently waited for the right moment. Good look for an opening and strike, commented Athena. 20 feet. 10 feet. 5 feet. He saw Mrs. Jackson roll out of the way but it seemed Percy was waiting too long. So he used his free hand and pushed him out of harm's way and jumped him into the air, heading for the tree. Nice moves Runt, sneered Ares. The monster seemed miffed by this as it blinked in confusion until he vaguely saw Naruto land near the tree. Super ninja skills, said Apollo. Everyone just rolled their eyes on the sun god's antics. Snorting, he faced Percy. It was sent for a purpose after all. To abduct Percy's mother and then test the master's son. Hades, shouted an enraged Poseidon. The anger sea god made the earth itself shake to its foundations. The seas were chaotic and dangerous to anyone at sea because there were hurricanes with some tsunami. But even land didn't save them from Poseidon rage because earthquakes were popping up everywhere. One of the earthquakes was a 9.5 while some mortals thought that the apocalypse was here. Huge storms were gathering everywhere on the world. Poseidon is the stormbringer. Percy quickly told Poseidon that Sally was alright and alive. After a few minutes Poseidon calmed down but glared at Hades for his actions. Hades looked shocked for a moment and thought, why would I go through all this trouble just to abduct this woman? Kushina glared at her husband and Hades flinched slightly. But she continued. Naruto growled. He would not let his friend die. So he laid Grover down near the tree and jumped back to Percy. Ah, my grandson is so brave and handsome, squealed Aphrodite. The other in the room just sighed at the love goddess antics. He landed Percy as he mom got to him. They looked at him oddly again and he said, it is a ninja thing. Just like your old mom, said Thals. Kushina gave her a mock glare but laughed a little later. Come on. Then they ran for their lives to the tree. Oh, camp is a little further away, smiled Annabeth. Naruto wondered why Mrs. Jackson said that she was not able to get to where they were going. Camp Half-Blood, said the demigods in the room. Reaching the hill with the tree, the boys took notice that a valley was below them and it had a farmhouse that had yellow lights glowing in the window. The big house, said Thals. The demigods smiled at her and Annabeth wished some of their siblings came over to read. Scowling, Naruto growled. With the way things were going, they would never make it. Don't think like that, sweetie, nervously said Kushina. Run, Percy. Naruto heard Mrs. Jackson call out. I can't go any farther. Run. Oh no, said Kushina. The gods and goddesses just bowed their heads then thought fate is so cruel. They froze in shock and fear as the Minotaur came rushing up to them and she tried to get out of the way like last time but it had learned its lesson last time. No, whimpered Poseidon and he shut his eyes hoping if he couldn't see it then it wouldn't happen. It brought out an arm and caught her by the neck while she struggled to get away. Everyone was staring transfixed on the image before them. The mortal Sally Jackson was in the clutches of the Minotaur. Her straight brown hair was plastered to her head due to the rain coming down from the heavens. Her sparkling blue eyes had a look of fear in them. Ones that Poseidon wished he never saw them because he instantly recoiled from it as if it burned him. She struggled in the Minotaur's grip but it was useless because it was too strong for her to get out of. Poseidon and the goddesses had tears in their eyes while the others looked elsewhere other than the scene before them. Mom, Mrs. Jackson. The boys screamed. She caught Percy's eyes, managed to choke out one last word. Go. Selfless to the very end, sniffed Kushina and Hera. Then, with an angry roar, the monster closed his fists around his mother's neck, and she dissolved before their eyes. The throne room was silent for the loss of Sally Jackson for her sacrifice. Percy looked at the scene with sadness in his sea-green eyes. Melting into light, a shimmering golden form, as if she were a holographic projection. A form of teleportation, croaked some of the gods. A blinding flash and she was simply gone. Hades trailed a broken-faced sea god. Percy looked defeated having to see the worst moments of his short life again. Hades had the decency to look ashamed of what his future and alternative self did. No, Percy yelled. What the hell is going on? Naruto yelled, irritated about what was going on. You got that from both Hades and me, said Kushina twirled her bright red hair around her fingers while holding the book open with her other hand. Anger overcame Percy and the boys nodded. They would have to try and take this thing down like Mrs. Dodds. You mean Electo? Half-joked Nico while thinking about the loss of Sally. He loved Sally like a mother because she always takes care of him when he really needs it. Like she makes him cookies when he is hungry. Or gives him company when he feels lonely or even a place for him to crash when he is tired. All in all Sally treats Nico like a son and in turn Nico treats Sally like a mom. It caught sight of Grover and charged after him, intent to stuff him out. Go Minotaur,